What happens when a prince refuses to back down and a television host pushes too far? You're about to witness one of the most explosive confrontations in recent television history. Before we dive into this incredible clash, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really triggered this massive blowout. The studio lights were blazing as Prince Harry settled into the guest chair across from Piers Morgan. The atmosphere was already thick with tension, and Morgan wasted no time cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "Your Royal Highness, let's address the elephant in the room," Morgan began, his voice carrying that familiar edge of confrontation. "You've made some rather serious allegations about the royal family. Some would say you've thrown your own family under the bus for money." Harry's jaw tightened visibly. "Piers, I came here to have an honest conversation, not to be ambushed with tabloid talking points." Tabloid talking points. Morgan's eyebrows shot up. "These are legitimate concerns raised by millions of people who feel you've betrayed the institution that made you who you are. The institution that made me who I am." Harry leaned forward, his voice rising slightly. "The same institution that stood by while my wife was subjected to racist attacks. The same institution that refused to protect my family." Morgan wasn't backing down. "Oh, come on, Harry. You lived a life of unimaginable privilege. You had everything handed to you on a silver platter. And the moment things got a bit challenging, you ran off to California to play victim." The prince's face flushed with anger. "A bit challenging." "Piers, my wife was having suicidal thoughts. She was denied help by the very people who were supposed to protect her. That's not challenging. That's life or death. And yet, you've profited handsomely from airing these grievances. Book deals, Netflix contracts, speaking engagements. It's quite the business model, isn't it?" Harry's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You think this is about money. You think I wanted any of this. I would have preferred to work it out privately. But when your own family briefs against you, in the press, what choice do you have? Your own family." Morgan scoffed. "The same family that welcomed Meghan with open arms. The same family that spent millions on your wedding while the British public footed the bill. And this is how you repay them. Welcomed her with open arms." Harry's laugh was bitter. "Were you there, Piers? Did you see the conversations that happened behind closed doors? Did you see the way she was treated by palace staff? Did you see the way certain family members questioned what color our children would be?" Morgan's eyes lit up with the scent of controversy. "Ah, yes, the racism allegations. Very convenient, aren't they? When you can't defend your actions, just cry racism. It's the oldest trick in the book." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Harry's knuckles were white as he gripped the arms of his chair. "Convenient? You think racism is convenient? You think my children having to grow up knowing that members of their own family question their worth because of their skin color is convenient? I think," Morgan said, leaning back with a smirk, "that you've found a very effective way to silence critics. Anyone who questions your narrative gets labeled a racist. It's quite clever, actually. Clever." Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't a game, Piers. This isn't some media strategy. This is my life, my wife's life, my children's lives." Morgan remained seated, seemingly unfazed by the prince's outburst. "And yet, you've turned your life into entertainment. You've commodified your pain, your family's pain, your mother's memory. Diana would be horrified to see what you've become." The mention of his mother was like a match thrown onto gasoline. Harry's face went from red to pale in an instant. "Don't you dare bring my mother into this. Don't you dare use her memory to score points in your pathetic attempts at journalism." Pathetic attempts at journalism. Morgan's voice rose to match Harry's intensity. "I'm asking the questions that millions of people want answered. I'm holding you accountable for your actions. That's what real journalists do. Real journalists." Harry's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You mean real journalists? Like the ones who hacked my phone? Real journalists like the ones who drove my mother to her death? Real journalists like the ones who made my wife's life a living hell?" Morgan stood up now, his face flushed with indignation. "Your mother's death was a tragedy, but it wasn't caused by journalists asking legitimate questions. It was caused by a drunk driver in a tunnel in Paris. And if you can't handle the scrutiny that comes with being a member of the royal family, Then maybe you should have thought about that before you started making millions by attacking that same family. I can handle scrutiny, Harry shot back, his voice echoing through the studio. What I can't handle is lies being presented as truth. What I can't handle is watching my wife be destroyed by the same forces that destroyed my mother. What I can't handle is people like you profiting from our pain while pretending to be the voice of reason. The two men stood facing each other, the tension crackling between them like electricity. Morgan's producer was frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, but neither man seemed to notice. People like me, Morgan's voice was dangerously quiet. I've spent my career asking tough questions and holding powerful people accountable. I've never hidden behind my title or my privilege when things got uncomfortable. I've never run away when the heat got too intense. Run away? Harry's voice cracked with emotion. You think I ran away? I tried to protect my family the only way I knew how. I tried to break the cycle of pain and trauma that has plagued my family for generations. And for that, I get called a traitor by people who don't know the first thing about what it's like to live under that kind of pressure. Morgan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. The pressure. To want to talk about pressure. Try being a working-class kid from Surrey who had to claw his way to the top. Try building a career from nothing while you were handed everything on a silver platter. Don't talk to me about pressure when you've never had to worry about paying rent or putting food on the table. Harry's eyes blazed with fury. You're right, Piers. I've never had to worry about those things, but I've had to worry about assassins and kidnappers and death threats. I've had to worry about whether my children would be safe walking to school. I've had to worry about whether my wife would survive another day of the relentless media attacks that you and your colleagues seem to enjoy so much. Death threats. Morgan's voice dripped with skepticism. How convenient. Another unprovable claim that's designed to make us all feel sorry for poor Prince Harry. Tell me, where's the evidence? Where are the police reports? Where's the proof that any of this actually happened? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Harry's response would determine whether this interview would end in reconciliation or a complete disaster. Harry's face went through a series of emotions, from rage to disbelief to something that looked almost like pity. You want proof, Piers? You want me to compromise ongoing security investigations just to satisfy your twisted need for drama? You want me to put my family at even greater risk just so you can have your gotcha moment? Morgan sensed weakness and pounced. What I want is honesty. What I want is for you to stop hiding behind vague claims and victim narratives. If these threats are real, then surely you can provide some evidence without compromising anyone's safety. The fact that you're even asking proves how little you understand about the world I live in. Harry replied, his voice steady but his hands shaking slightly. The fact that you think security threats are something to be discussed on television shows just how disconnected you are from reality. Disconnected from reality? Morgan laughed harshly. Rich coming from someone who lives in a $16 million mansion in Montecito while lecturing the rest of us about privilege and hardship. You want to talk about disconnected from reality? Look in the mirror, Your Royal Highness. Harry's composure finally cracked completely. You know what, Piers? You're absolutely right. I am privileged. I am wealthy. I have had advantages that most people can only dream of. But that doesn't mean I don't have the right to protect my family. That doesn't mean I don't have the right to speak out against injustice when I see it. Injustice, Morgan's voice rose to a shout, you call living in palaces and having every whim catered to injustice. You call being given the best education, the best opportunities, the best of everything injustice? What would you call real injustice then? What would you call the experiences of people who actually suffer? I would call it what happened to my mother, Harry shot back, his voice breaking. I would call it what happened to my wife. I would call it what happens to anyone who dares to challenge the system that you and your media friends profit from so handsomely. Morgan's eyes narrowed. Your mother again, always back to Diana. Tell me, Harry, how do you think she would feel knowing that you've turned her memory into a weapon? How do you think she would feel knowing that you're using her death to justify your own selfish choices? The studio fell silent, except for the hum of the cameras. Harry stood frozen, his face a mask of pain and fury. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. My mother died because she was trying to find happiness. She died because she was pursued by photographers who saw her as nothing more than a commodity. She died because people like you created a market for her pain. And you have the audacity to ask me how she would feel? I have the audacity to ask because I knew your mother, Morgan replied, his voice suddenly softer but no less dangerous. I interviewed her, I spoke with her, and the woman I knew would never have wanted her sons to use her death as an excuse to abandon their duty to the crown and the country. Harry's laugh was hollow and bitter. You knew her? You had a few conversations with her for television, and you think you knew her? You have no idea what she went through. You have no idea what she told me about the media, about the palace, about the machine that ultimately destroyed her. What machine? Morgan demanded. What specifically are you talking about? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're blaming everyone except the people who were actually responsible for the car crash that killed her. The car crash was the end result, Harry said, his voice gaining strength. But the machine, that put her in that car, that made her feel like she had to run, that made her feel like she had no other choice, that machine is still running. It's still destroying lives. It's still protecting the wrong people and sacrificing the innocent. Morgan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. And you think you're innocent? You think you're some kind of victim in all this? You've made millions from trashing your family. You've built a brand on betrayal. You've turned your personal grievances into a global media empire. How is that innocent? Because I'm trying to break the cycle, Harry replied, his voice rising. Again, I'm trying to make sure that what happened to my mother, what happened to my wife, doesn't happen to my children. I'm trying to create a world where they can be safe, where they can be happy, where they can be free from the toxicity that has poisoned my family for generations. Free from toxicity. Morgan's laugh was sharp and mocking. By moving to Hollywood and signing deals with Netflix, by doing tell-all interviews and writing explosive memoirs, by airing your family's dirty laundry in public. That's your idea of escaping toxicity. At least I'm being honest about it, Harry shot back. At least I'm not pretending that everything is fine while people suffer in silence. At least I'm not covering up the truth to protect an institution that values reputation over human lives. Human lives? Morgan's voice reached a crescendo. What about the human lives you've destroyed with your accusations? What about the human lives affected by your betrayal? What about the human lives of the people who have served your family faithfully for decades, only to be painted as villains in your carefully constructed narrative? Harry's face contorted with rage. Carefully constructed narrative. You think I constructed my wife's suicidal thoughts? You think I constructed the racism she faced? You think I constructed the way she was treated by your precious institution? I think, Morgan said, his voice deadly calm, that you've found a very effective way to monetize your grievances. I think you've discovered that victim narratives sell books and streaming deals. I think you've learned that the more outrageous your claims, the more attention you get, and the more attention you get, the more money you make. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Harry's breathing was rapid and shallow, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet that the microphones barely picked it up. You think this is about money? You think I wanted any of this? You think I enjoyed watching my wife suffer? You think I enjoyed being cut off from my family? You think I enjoyed having to start over in a foreign country with nothing but the clothes on my back? Nothing but the clothes on your back? Morgan's voice was incredulous. You had millions in inheritance from your mother. You had connections that most people can only dream of. You had opportunities that opened doors before you even knocked. Don't insult the intelligence of our viewers by pretending you were some kind of penniless refugee. Fine, Harry said, his voice hardening. You want to talk about money? Let's talk about money. Let's talk about how much you've made from covering my family's tragedies. Let's talk about how much your network has profited from our pain. Let's talk about how much the entire media ecosystem has benefited from turning our lives into entertainment. Morgan's face flushed red. That's rich, coming from someone who just signed a $100 million deal with Netflix. That's rich, coming from someone who wrote a best-selling memoir filled with intimate family details. That's rich, coming from someone who has literally turned his family drama into a business model. At least I'm the one telling my own story, Harry replied, his voice gaining momentum. At least I'm the one controlling my own narrative. At least I'm not letting people like you profit from lies and speculation, while I stay silent and suffer. lies, and speculation, Morgan's voice cracked with indignation. I've spent my entire career reporting facts. I've spent my entire career holding powerful people accountable. I've spent my entire career asking the tough questions that others are too afraid to ask. Tough questions? Harry's laugh was bitter. Is that what you call this? Is that what you call ambushing me with tabloid talking points and character assassination? Is that what you call trying to provoke me into saying something that you can use as a soundbite for the next week? The tension in the studio was reaching a breaking point. Morgan's producer was making frantic gestures from behind the cameras, but both men seemed oblivious to everything except their mounting conflict. The audience could sense that something was about to explode, and neither man seemed capable of backing down. Morgan took a step back, his face twisted with frustration and something that looked almost like desperation. Soundbites. You think this is about soundbites? This is about accountability, Harry. This is about a man who has abandoned his duty, betrayed his family, and wrapped himself in victimhood while profiting from his own destruction. Abandoned my duty. Harry's voice rose to a roar. My duty was to protect my family. My duty was to break the cycle of abuse and neglect that has plagued the royal family for generations. My duty was to ensure that my children don't grow up in the same toxic environment that nearly destroyed me. Toxic environment. The same toxic environment that gave you the best education money can buy. The same toxic environment that opened every door for you. The same toxic environment that made you one of the most privileged people on the planet. Privilege doesn't protect you from emotional abuse, Harry shot back, his voice cracking with emotion. Privilege doesn't protect you from being gaslit by your own family. Privilege doesn't protect you from watching the woman you love being torn apart by the very people who are supposed to support her. Morgan's eyes blazed with fury. Emotional abuse, gaslighting. These are very serious accusations, Harry. These are the kind of accusations that destroy lives and reputations. Do you have any proof of these claims, or are we supposed to take your word for it because you're a prince? Take my word for it. Harry's laugh was harsh and desperate. When have I ever asked anyone to take my word for anything? Everything I've said has been backed up by evidence, by witnesses, by documentation. The only reason you're questioning it is because it doesn't fit your narrative. My narrative? Morgan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. My narrative is the truth. My narrative is that you've found a way to make millions by playing the victim. My narrative is that you've discovered that the more outrageous your claims, the more sympathy you get, and the more sympathy you get, the more money you make. Harry's face went white with rage. You want to talk about making money from tragedy? Let's talk about your career, Piers. Let's talk about how you've built your reputation on other people's misery. Let's talk about how you've made millions by exploiting the pain of others. I've made my money by telling the truth, Morgan replied, his voice rising again. I've made my money by asking the hard questions that others are too cowardly to ask. I've made my money by holding powerful people accountable for their actions. Holding people accountable. Harry's voice was incredulous. Is that what you call this? Is that what you call attacking a man who's trying to protect his family? Is that what you call victim blaming and character assassination? Morgan's face was purple with rage. Victim blaming. You're not a victim, Harry. You're a perpetrator. You're the one who has caused pain and division. You're the one who has betrayed the trust of millions of people who looked up to you. Betrayed the trust. Harry's voice broke completely. I've told the truth. I've spoken my truth. I've tried to shed light on a system that protects abusers and silences victims. If that's betrayal, then I'm guilty as charged. Your truth, Morgan's laugh, was sharp and mocking. There's no such thing as your truth, Harry. There's only the truth. And the truth is that you've abandoned your family, your country, and your duty for money and fame. Harry stood frozen for a moment, his chest heaving with emotion. When he spoke, his voice was barely controlled. You know what, Piers? You're right about one thing. I have abandoned my duty. I've abandoned my duty to stay silent while people suffer. I've abandoned my duty to protect an institution that values reputation over human lives. I've abandoned my duty to pretend that everything is fine when it's not. And in doing so, Morgan replied, his voice cold and calculating, that you're not fit to be a member of the royal family. You've proven that you don't have the strength or the character to handle the responsibilities that come with your position. The words hit Harry like a physical blow. His face crumpled with pain and rage. Not fit. Not fit. You think I haven't sacrificed enough? You think I haven't given enough? You think I haven't suffered enough for this family? I think, Morgan said, his voice deadly quiet, that you've never understood what sacrifice really means. I think you've confused selfishness with bravery. I think you've mistaken cowardice for courage. Harry's hands were shaking uncontrollably now. Cowardice. You call protecting my family cowardice. You call standing up to bullies cowardice. You call speaking truth to power cowardice. I call running away when things get tough cowardice, Morgan replied, his voice rising to match Harry's intensity. I call abandoning your responsibilities cowardice. I call throwing your family under the bus for personal gain cowardice. Personal gain. Harry's voice was a strangled scream. What have I gained, Piers? What have I really gained? I've lost my family. I've lost my country. I've lost my identity. I've lost everything that mattered to me. What exactly have I gained? You've gained millions of dollars, Morgan shot back without hesitation. You've gained international fame. You've gained a platform to spread your narrative. You've gained the ability to control your own story. That's what you've gained. Harry stood there, his whole body trembling with rage and anguish. You think money can replace family? You think fame can replace belonging? You think a platform can replace love and acceptance? I think, Morgan said, his voice now calm and measured, that you made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. I think you've burned your bridges, and now you're angry that you can't cross back over them. The studio fell silent except for the sound of Harry's labored breathing. The prince looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time, his eyes wild and unfocused. You know what? Harry said finally, his voice unnaturally calm. You're absolutely right about one thing. I have made my choices, and I would make them again. Because protecting my family is worth more than your approval. Because my children's safety is worth more than your respect. Because my wife's life is worth more than your opinion. And there it is, Morgan said, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. There's the truth. You don't care about duty or service or the greater good. You only care about yourself and your immediate family. You've proven my point perfectly. Harry looked at Morgan for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You know what the real tragedy is, Piers? It's not that I've disappointed you. It's not that I've failed to live up to your expectations. The real tragedy is that you've become so consumed with tearing people down that you've forgotten what it means to build them up. Build them up. Morgan's voice was incredulous. I'm trying to hold you accountable for your actions. I'm trying to make you face the consequences of your choices. That's not tearing you down. That's helping you grow. Up. No, Harry said, his voice suddenly clear and strong. What you're doing is exactly what killed my mother. What you're doing is exactly what drove my wife to the brink of suicide. What you're doing is exactly what I've spent my entire adult life trying to escape. Harry began walking toward the studio exit, his movements deliberate and controlled. Morgan called after him, his voice desperate and angry. You can't just walk away, Harry. You can't just leave when the questions get too hard. You can't just run away again. Harry stopped at the studio door and turned back to face Morgan one last time. Watch me, he said simply, and walked out. Morgan stood alone in the studio, his face a mixture of triumph and confusion. He had pushed the prince to his breaking point, gotten the explosive television he had wanted, but somehow the victory felt hollow. Well, Morgan said to the cameras, his voice slightly shaky, there you have it, Prince Harry, everyone. Showing his true colors when faced with tough questions, but even as he spoke, Morgan knew that something had shifted. The prince had left on his own terms, with his dignity intact, and somehow that felt more like defeat than victory. The cameras kept rolling, but the real story was already over. The prince had chosen his family over the institution, his truth over public opinion, and his peace over the approval of people like Piers Morgan. And in the end, that choice said more about both men than any words ever could. What do you think really pushed Prince Harry over the edge? Was it Morgan's attacks on his family or something deeper? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.